Next thing we're going to do is start, closing this engine up. It's not good to leave it open like that. Yeah, keep covering it every time you do something else, and we're going to get it sealed up. So we're going to put the rocker arms and push rods back on, and you should put oil down in here, especially in the tips here and all that. I got some assembly lube left over from an engine build, so I'm going to use that up. And then I squirt the valves themselves with oil. The stems. Just enough to coat them, especially on these reman heads. There's nothing on these, are bone dry. Now these push rods are a little bit tricky, but you just need to come in here and lined up in their hole in the lifter, and they'll kind of just rest there until you get the rocker arm on. But make sure you hit the center of it, because some of them go at an angle here like this one does. So use a flashlight and make sure you're fully inserted in there. And then we'll do a post check, obviously. Put it on here also. Why not? I gotta use this stuff up. And then I lube the rocker where it contacts the valve stem and of course the push rod area. And then we can get it lined up. And I'll do a close-up to show you how to align the tower here with the push rod with the valve stem itself. Give you a nice close-up so we don't cock it in there and cause new problems. Now we're putting these back here in order, and we took them out just for wear, so keep wear patterns the same. I don't know if it's a huge issue on a 120,000 mile Taurus, but. And then as long as they're aligned, I snug them down with my impact. And then we'll torque them down after that. Here's a good shot of the push rod going down to the lifter there, and it's fully centered in there, so just make sure they're all like that. And as far as your rocker and fulcrum right here, make sure it's centered right there in the tower right here, and then you can tighten it down and it'll self-align to the actual valve stem tip. Repeat the same steps for the rears so we can get that all buttoned up back there. Get these all torqued down and aligned. Alright, time to put the valve cover gaskets back on. Make sure you clean your sealing surface, especially right here where it meets the manifold. So we need to put some sealant on there, some engine sealant. Nice new gasket in there. Make sure it's pushed down all the way around. We're all set to go, so we're going to put the sealant, a little dab of it right there, and the same thing on this side. And then you can set the valve cover right down in there. Once you got all your bolts in the valve cover, threaded in properly, then we can torque them down to 9 foot-pounds. And there's no actual torque sequence, so we're just going to jump around and go basically from the center out. And then the same procedure applies for the rear. You got to put that sealant on the lip there where it meets the intake manifold, and we'll torque them down at 9 foot-pounds also. Now, in case you got it mixed up, the rear valve cover is not all studs like the front. So there's 2 studs for the rear, and they go right here, one there, and that's for the spark plug wires. Alright, so speaking of spark plug wires, you might as well put them in now. Put a little bit of dielectric grease on them and connect them all up while we got free access. You can clip it into our valve cover too at those 2 points. Let's get this heat shield on here before we get any more assembled here, because this one's a little bit of a pain to get on. So we're going to start installing the cat converter shield for sure. Once you slip it on and over the cat there's a bolt right here. It's a stubby that goes into the cylinder head, and then there's a nut right there. You can see it. And then over here in the wheel well opening, there's another nut. Tighten all those up. We can move on to the accessory drive bracket. Put your cam sensor back on. Tighten these 2 bolts right here. So that's all sealed up. And we can lay our spark plug wires over and under like they were, just so they're out of the way of the harness, because we're going to start messing with that too. Let's put that dipstick tube back in, and then tighten that nut down. And then if you did move the power steering line, get it back on the stud, and we're going to keep the bolt loose for now, the nut, until we actually put the pump in and align this fitting up. Speaking of the fitting, much better. Make sure you put a new Teflon O-ring on here, and I got a whole video on that. Let's get our spark plug wires in the front all pushed in and retained, and then we might as well put the coil on and put them all on here. Now, in case you mix them up, it goes 1, 2, 3, and then it goes 5, 6, 4. Get your bracket into place, just set it down in here, and then we're going to concentrate on getting this hose on here first, and the clamp while we still have easy access, and then we'll mount the bracket up to the head here, and then last we'll deal with this fitting right here. Going back in with this bracket, you got 2 studs, and the short end down here goes in, and then the long end stays out. I use blue Loctite on these, and there's one down here, right here, underneath this mounting boss right here for the idler, and there's one right here. Pick up on your bracket a little bit, and you'll start to get it in there. Got it in there by hand. Now we're going to use a stud installer. You can alternately use a double nut trick, where you put a nut on there about this far, and then you get another nut and you put it on there, and it'll stop on the other nut, and then you turn this front nut and it'll turn the whole stud in. This is basically doing the same thing without all that hassle. And that's the way I did it for years, until I finally had enough and I bought an actual stud installer and remover that met my standards basically. Wasn't too much, highly rated, and was the sizes I needed. Just snug them up. And there's a third bolt, and it goes right down. You got the mounting boss right here for the tensioner. It goes right underneath that. So you want to get that in there and aligned also. And then we can start putting these nuts on here. might as well put our tensioner and idler on. I use Loctite on both of them. Make sure your tensioner is keyed to the bracket. You'll see a little slot on the bracket, and you'll see a little nub sticking out of the back of the tensioner. The way you can verify is to look at the tensioner if it's mating up flush with the bracket here or not. Get this idler on. Now, in order to get this power steering line onto that fitting, you're going to have to kind of push on it and hold it in and align it while you tighten it with the other hand. And after that's tightened, we can go over here and finish tightening down the nut right here that holds it to the exhaust manifold, since we're aligned down here now. And then you might as well fill it with some fresh power steering fluid. Mercon V is best. And let it do a little gravity bleeding while we're putting the rest of this together. Get your heater hose back on, connect it all up, and then we're going to start laying this harness down. Alright, we've got some good lighting. We're going to lay the harness down because there's a lot of connections, like right here by the crank sensor and all that. It's going to be harder to get to as we put more, brackets on and alternators and all that. So we're going to get this going now. First thing that's going to align it is the big chase right here. Right here. There's two studs right here that it sits down in. Get them down in there and we'll start doing these injections until they click. Then we'll come around to this side and do the injectors on this side too. Okay. Retainer right there. Coil, pigtail right here. Get that in there. We'll get our capacitor out of the way until the upper intake's on. Let's do the fuel rail pressure sensor. Make sure this is all laying in here right. And this crank sensor wants to go down behind the hose here. Let's follow this bundle over here. This is for the alternator. And these ones laid down over here. There's a retainer right here. And make sure you get it in there. There we go. There's your O2s. This is for your AC compressor clutch. And then this is for your power steering pressure switch. Or actually it's for the AC high pressure switch. And that's all right down here. Now on this side I'll go over the connections really quick since you really can't see anything from the other side. You got that connector right there, that retainer, CHT sensor. You got this connector right here, and then you got your hose. Put your hose back on to clamp it up, your cam sensor, and then there's a push retainer right here. It goes into the head to hold that harness in place. And what else is there over here? And then back here behind the in the rear bank here, you got the O2 sensor. Connect that up, and then this whole thing can just hang out here until the upper intake's on. And we got this connection right here, and then we got your ground right there, ground bolt we took out earlier, and then you got your PCM connector also. And here's how I got that crank sensor wire harness laid out, since the retainer's missing, and we got it clipped in. It kind of lays naturally there. Next thing we're going to do is put the alternator in so we can finish up the belt routing before we put anything else in the way. Make it as easy as possible. Put that belt on. It's not a fun task in the first place. Okay, so we got this long bolt. we'll get that threaded in by hand. Okay. Then we have this big old brace over here. Actually, it goes this way. And that's going to go in here. And then that big stud down here. Let's get those bolts in so it'll line up. And there's this one. This bolt goes through both of these. Let's get this on here. And the nut. Let's make sure this bolt is in there, and then we're going to tighten this one. Let's see if we can get you, okay. I'll put our connector on. And then we'll tighten the other alternator bolt right here. And then finally over here at the brace. This is all secure, and now let's put this last nut right here all the way down here. That supports the lower end of that bracket. Let's get this fuel connector on. I put a little bit of grease on here. Just a little bit. Help it on. They get dry. And then we'll snap it until it clicks. And you can't get it off. And don't forget your safety catch. We're getting there, guys. We're getting there. Let's get this belt on while it's nice and easy. Well, kind of. Easy as it's gonna get. And the same thing is coming off. We're gonna use a 15mm combo wrench and an extension. Whew. And we're gonna burn ourselves. Get it over. And the belt routing looks just like this, in case you forgot. I actually forgot, but then I remembered. Let's get this air bleed hose on here before we put the intake on. It goes up and over, retains here and here, into the little stud sticking out of the valve cover, goes underneath, and then it comes out in between all that. And it'll eventually go to our bottle. I have my bottle off of here for ease. Put our intake on next. Fresh gaskets. Get it centered on there. Make sure you mate up with the EGR tube back here. Should go straight down onto it. And this one goes here. And the stud goes over here for this. Let's put our PCV tube in right now. Make sure you clean it with the brake clean on the outside, so there's no vacuum leaks. Snug these down. Make sure you get your rags out of there. They want us to tighten these down snug like I just did, and then a second stage of 89 inch-pounds. That's number 1. Here's 2. And then this on. After the intake's on, it's just a barrage of connections, vacuum, electrical, all that. Don't forget your main power wire for the alternator. And then your vacuum line, your vacuum tree, put that on. You'll kind of just follow it around to all your points of vacuum. This big one right here is where it all starts. And then you got your vacuum regulator and your DPFE connectors and EGR vacuum connector. Make sure they're all in there. And then this whole section of harness here retains to the intake back here, just pushes in. Then we're going to get our throttle cables back on here, our 2 bolts, and then we're going to hook in the throttle return spring. It faces this way, J hooks that way, and this just wraps around and then it hooks into the slot right there. Just match it to the slot, push it through, and it'll turn and it'll be perpendicular to the slot. And this one, you just go up and around it, and then you pull back and it'll clip in, you'll hear it. IAC TP sensor, and then tighten your EGR nut down. Obviously, you got your evap vacuum hose that just pushes on, and you got this big one that comes out the intake, and that just pushes on all the way. At this point, make sure there's no debris in here. And then we're going to put the snow shield on here and the air intake snorkel. A few last things. We got our upper radiator hose. Put that on there. Put our intake snorkel here. Mass airflow sensor. That hose. That hose. Tighten her down. And don't forget your bracket for the intake. 1 nut there. 13 millibolt down there in the head. And your wire harness pushes into it. Bolt your coolant bottle back in, and then we'll connect up the 3 hoses, the 2 bleeders, and then your main one down there. At this point, I think we can start filling everything up. A few last connections down here. We got our O2 sensor, blue and green, and then your up there. Let's see. There it is, up here. You got your AC compressor clutch. Push that connector in, and then make sure your drain plug is tightened on the oil pan and your radiator right here, and then we can start filling fluids. Now, anytime you do a head gasket job or a front cover, anything like that, they want you to drain the oil and change the filter out because of the possibility of coolant and oil mixture. So if you haven't already, do that now. Make sure you recheck the water pump pulley bolts there, the 4 bolts. Since we got the belt on, they can hold it for us a little bit. Just make sure you retighten them down. Okay, so I got my oil in, a little over 5 quarts. And then I'm going to do a vacuum filling of the cooling system since we drained those cooling jackets around the cylinders. So there's no hot spots when we start it up while the coolant's trying to flow. This way, there's coolant in there to start with, so there's never no hot spots. That's a really good idea. I know it's not always possible. So fill it up with the 50-50 mixture. I use gold for any of these, especially if you drained out and flush out the system this much. I always use the Ford Gold coolant for refills. They're really good stuff. Alright, everything looks good. All our fluids are filled. Engine oil, power steering obviously. And then our coolant's a little overfilled so that we can it can bleed out the rest of the way. Alright, so we're going to disconnect the crank position sensor and get it out of the way of the belt, and then we're going to let it just sit there, and we're going to go over and we're going to crank the engine until we see oil pressure in the on the actual gauge. And that way we got either pressurized lubrication, you know, the oil filter filled and all that, and we'll also get the splash lubrication up on the top end here before we even think about starting the engine. And that way it's pre-pressurized, basically. Alright, we're going to go crank it, and even if the oil light does go out, we're going to still crank it for 15, 20, 30 seconds either way. this is that, like our power steering pump, sucked it down, started filling the lines. We can adjust the fluid level so that when we do start, it's not sucking air immediately. So now that's partially bled, and we can top it off. And then since we did pressurize the system and fill the oil filter, we can also check oil level before we ever actually start it too. And it should be, a fairly accurate reading. Safe for startup. We're at the top. We're good. Put the cap back on this. Now after it starts like that and it, this fuel starts bleeding out and it starts running fine, idles fine, at that point I shut it off and I come check the oil level one more time before we just let it, sit here running. And we're still good. Power steering real quick, still good. It's not even full of air actually, so that's really nice. And then our coolant's still good. We'll have to keep monitoring the coolant, of course, as it runs and everything opens up and fills up perfectly. At this point, just let it run. For 10-15 minutes at idle. Don't start putting accessories on it. Don't start driving it. Just let it idle, and we can start checking all our areas for leaks or any other issues. It's going to start smoking like this a little bit in the manifolds, especially if you use rust penetrant. It's definitely going to be smoking. It soaks right into that cast iron. So it'll smoke pretty good for a little while till it burns off. Nothing to worry about. Alright guys, so we got it all complete and it runs great. Absolutely runs great. The cylinder misfire for 5 and 6 is gone. And we had one little small coolant leak on a radiator hose. I got a video on that. I got distracted. I put the hose clamp on there just right, keyed on there just right for the old grooves, basically. Besides that, I checked the fluid levels, cold and hot, after it was running for a while, and just rechecked everything. So I hope this video has helped a lot. Cylinder head gaskets can be a huge job. And I'm probably going to have to break up this video into 2 or 3 segments probably. So I hope this has helped, and I'm sure it has, especially if you have this concern. And if you have any issues with misfires or other issues like that, you're thinking maybe you need to pull the heads for valve seat issues, I do have videos on that, showing how to air test them and how to listen while it's cranking to hear if you have a compression issue or otherwise. So, if you need to delve into this far into the heads or not. Head gaskets on these really aren't that common unless you overheat. That's the only time I've ever really seen them. And besides that, it's you're pulling them off for a lot of times for valve seat issues. The docks too. These ones more, but the docks and the Tauruses also have this problem. So, if this has helped, please subscribe. I always have something new. It doesn't matter what kind of vehicle it is, from a car to a truck. I basically do everything on them except for bodywork. So, if it comes in and it's interesting or common, and I think it's going to help out, I put it up. I record it and I put it up. Quite soon after I shoot it, I get it edited and get it out. So there's no video stacking up. So there's always something new coming out all week long, maybe a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. So it just depends what's going on and how busy it is.